saddle, travelling further forward over the scapula. Good morning everyone. Okay, so I just want to do a little bit of a video in regards to some non-negotiables about saddle fitting and saddle placement. And this will be the first one of it. I'll keep it nice and short so we can sort of follow along and uptake the information and hopefully implement it with our horses. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the importance of scapular range and scapular clearance, basically, when we're talking about saddle fit. Now, scapula, in a nutshell, the scapula is the fancy scientific word for the shoulder blade, basically, that we know of. Now, this is very dynamic. It moves a lot, and particularly when we're riding our horses, it moves backwards and it moves forwards. There's a lot of rotation that goes on that creates basically the movement in transference through the actual hoof to the ground, and then locomotion occurs. So, saddle fit, really, really important. I think the other day I saw a post on there being like a triad of three things that must be there, like the sacred triad of saddle fit. And this is a really big one. This is number one. Your saddle must not have any restrictive material, which basically refers to the tree of the saddle travelling further forward over the scapula. So that means that your saddle's tree, if you're in a show jump saddle, or if you're in a dressage saddle, must sit behind the actual scapular head. Now the scapular head is basically a very soft cartilaginous covering that goes over the top of the scapula, the whole shoulder blade that runs down here. And effectively what that does is it basically provides a sliding surface and a protected surface that allows it to glide underneath the tissue effectively as it's moving. This is really, really important. It's really important that this stays clear as well. You run into an awful lot of issues when it comes to blocking the scapula, and also you can result in long-term issues with trauma to the scapular cartilage, and itself isn't particularly good at repairing in a very speedily manner, so that's something we really need to be careful of. So when placing your saddle, what you need to do is be really mindful of that your saddle fit sits behind the scapula. Now the way that you can feel it effectively, you come to the front of the shoulder and you can have a feel of, thank you Kian, that's very nice. You can have a feel of the actual scapular ridge, which is this bony ridge at the front. And then you run your hand up and you can almost feel like this little curvature, this scoop, just below the wither effectively. So that's the top of your scapular head basically. What you want to do, excuse me, I'm getting groomed, is you want to run your hands around the back and down and feel where it drops off basically, about where your saddle would go, behind at the base of the wither. And then you can run your fingers down and palpate that till you come down around the back of the scapula. Once you get to about here, you'll actually feel a thickening, and that's basically for the tissue down here effectively, and that's your insertion point for your musculature that helps flex the shoulder basically down here. So this is what you need to have clear. Now one of the things that I usually say to clients is it's a non-negotiable basically. In some horses that tend to have a deep set shoulder and their girth groove is down here, you end up with what we call a very forward girth groove, particularly on horses that are quite wide. So you need to bear that in mind. It's not really an option to set your saddle up here where your girth sits down here. What you have to do is just, deal with the issues of effectively your saddle has to go behind the scapula, your saddle tree has to go behind the scapula, so that's that weight bearing part of the saddle that the actual scapula needs to slide under when the horse is moving. And then your girth has to accommodate that basically as you're going along. So that's a non-negotiable. Now the way I usually say to clients is that pop your saddle in place, slide it down and have a feel. Basically, get your hand, run it around that curve, down to the back, and then rotate your hand. And that's where your saddle should be sitting. It should be clearing that area through there basically. Provide that room for your horse. Because we know that when the horse is moving, like I said at the start of the video, the scapula does move. It moves backwards, so it needs somewhere to glide. And if you're already starting with it over the scapula, what you're going to be doing is you're effectively going to be having a situation where your actual saddle is gliding up forward into this bony part of the scapula. Really problematic. You have issues with shoulder movement, you'll have issues with breathing, and all of this just runs into this whole sort of catastrophic scenario for the whole spinal column and the horse. Just saw a bandicoot run past. So we're back again. We've got Kian's saddle on her back basically without any extra bits basically. And we need to sort of think about, like, we can have a look here and we go, goodness me, that's an awful lot of clearance between the wither, and it feels like an awful lot of room. And then if you have a look down here, you sort of go, wow, those girth points are really, really far back. But the issue with this situation is the fact that she has a broad shoulder. She's very active through the shoulder, as all horses are, and they actually need the opportunity to be active. And she's quite deep set with it. So we can't, in her situation, basically provide a case where we're sitting that the front of the saddle effectively of the wither. So again, I've popped my saddle into place and I'm running my hand over the top of the scapular head, and I can actually feel that gap there between the front of the saddle where the tree would be. So there is actually clearance in that position through there as well. So it's really important to keep that in mind. And with Kid, of course, with her girth points, there's a bit of an issue because it feels like I'm setting him quite far back. But really, in reality, that's not an unreasonable place to actually be having the girth. What we need to do is just bear in mind the fact that we probably need to look at a different girth shape for Kian because of the fact that she's got a forward girth. Her girth point is set forward and effectively, or she has a shape that is wanting to pull that girth forward, and that's basically because she's shaped like a very acute pear. This belly is a decent roundness, the back is very broad, but at the same time through this actual thoracic area at the front of the saddle and the back of the scapula, she's fairly narrow as well. So bear that in mind, guys. It's really, really important that you give that room and that clearance for your scapular head. You know, you're going to run into all sorts of issues down the spinal column, tension, problems with, engagement of the hindquarters, problems with flexion of the spine, correct engagement of the core, stabilizing muscles that we all know are very, very important. Once you start to have tension through those areas, it runs into a whole lot of issues with, hollowing through the back, extending through the spine, rushing through the hand, pulling on the bit. And, we don't want to start to develop a whole heap of issues. So, number one, saddle has to sit behind that scapular head. You have to have room for that to actually move. And number two, you basically need to not guide your saddle placement by the girth points with it. So we'll talk through a few more things as we go along, basically, and other things you can look out for. But that's the number one for you to bear in mind. Also, if your saddle has been fitted for that placement and you come and bring it forward, you're going to run into the issue of your saddle effectively sitting up too high at the front, and you're going to have a very poorly balanced saddle as well. And in this situation, effectively, if I'm sitting it there, I've got to lift it up to that point to basically be clear, and that's a good couple of inches, so we don't want that to happen. Okay, it's enough from me today, but remember, identify where your scapular head is, your horse's scapular head is, and make sure that fixed portion of the saddle is well behind that. Okay, you have a great day, and we'll chat next time.